should be recorded and all should be going well. I have two different ways to record, so I'm not going to leave that one to chance. So let's get cracking. Now, you can ask questions. Everybody in this classroom is muted except for me. So, don't be afraid if the dog starts to bark or wants to get out. I can't hear you. But if you do want to ask a question, use the chat box. And you can ask the chat box, or ask a question in the chat box. I may be able to get to it as I'm talking, or I might have to leave it to the end. But I will try and check back with the chat box all the time. It's kind of hard for me to do two screens here, but I'll do my best. But at least at the end of the session, we'll have time for questions. All right, so let's get going. So what we're going to learn tonight is very specific. We're going to learn, and you're going to, by the end of this time with me, you're going to know the 3 things that you must learn to do before you even take any photos. Now, this is going to apply to a digital SLR camera, or I know some of you may have a bridge or a compact camera. Same things are going to apply. We're then going to talk about the 3 most powerful automatic modes in your digital SLR, and we're going to talk about when you're going to use them. We're not going to cover manual settings in this session. It's just too much to get into, and most of the people who I am aiming this to are complete beginners or novices. But we are going to talk about the automatic modes and how to use them properly. And then you're going to know the single most important thing that you can learn to set correctly, which is going to dramatically improve your photos. And without knowing this one thing, everything else is kind of lost. It's so simple, you will be surprised, but you will also be surprised that you're not actually setting it right to begin with. So before we take any photos at all, it is really important to know and learn how to hold your camera correctly. Now, a lot of people laugh at me when I say this because it's like, come on, it's a camera, right? But every day, and anybody that knows me, I go around trying to teach people who I know I cannot help but tell people, even I'll go up to a stranger on the street, how to hold your camera correctly, because it's designed in a certain way, and if you're not holding it that certain way, then your fingers are going to get in the way of the flash, your fingers are going to get in the way of the lens, and you're not supporting the camera or using it the correct way. Now, a digital SLR is a much bigger and bulkier machine than a compact camera, or maybe if you've been using your iPhone, you'll find that it's totally different. So it is important that you learn to hold it correctly. Now, this is my hubby Sam here, and he has been posing for me to try and get these shots right. So as you can see, the camera, and most cameras are designed for right-handed people. So he's holding the camera with his the grip of his right hand around the camera and the finger over the shutter button. But the really key thing is that he's supporting the lens with his left hand, and he's using his thumb and his forefinger, or his index finger, to turn the zoom ring on the lens. Now, if you've been shooting, the most natural way for most people to do this is the opposite way around. Most people, when I meet them, have their hand over at the top of the lens and they're twisting it that way. Now, a couple of things happen when you do it like that. First of all, you're not supporting the weight of your camera. Your fingers can get in the way of the lens and can get in the way of the flash. And you're actually, even though you may not realize it, you're dragging the lens down. And so you will have a slight tilt to your photographs or to your images. They won't look exactly straight on. And that will change your angle. It will change how people appear in photos. It will change a whole bunch of things. So hold it right, support the camera underneath. And this is particularly important if you have a large zoom lens. The larger the zoom, the more important it is to hold your camera. Now, when you do this, this will also encourage you to tuck your elbows tightly in towards your body, which will actually give you a little bit more support as well. And they kind of act like a little bit of a tripod. When you have your hand out on top of your camera lens, the incorrect way to do it, your elbows are kind of flapping around, and so there's more chance of you getting knocked or moved around. So a steady shot is always a good shot. So keep your elbows tucked into your body, and then you can take the picture. Now, you'll also see from the camera or from the photo that Sam's looking through the viewfinder. And this is something that's different for a lot of people as well. If you're coming from using a phone or using a compact camera, you might be able to, or being used to have been using the little LCD screen on the back of your camera. Now, although a lot of digital SLR cameras do have a live view capability and allow you to see in your screen at the back and use that as a viewfinder, I encourage you not to do that and to use the optical viewfinder like Sam's doing in the lens. Look through that little eyepiece. There's several reasons for that. The main one is really because it is just a split second faster than if you're looking through the live view. The camera was originally designed for you to look through the viewfinder, so use it. But also see that there's a whole bunch of more information in the viewfinder, and it's really the information that you need. So shutter speed, aperture, ISO. As you progress in your photography, these things are going to be very important. And the idea is that you never actually even have to take your eye away from that viewfinder to shoot. You can just go ahead and shoot and change your settings as you go. So it's very important to get used to that, and it is a little tricky for people who haven't been used to it. All right, let's see. Let's move on here. I'm just checking. So holding your camera, pretty much what I've said already, reduces the camera shake and blur. And a very important one for the ladies, it helps you to look cuter, because when you hold in your elbows, you can stick your bum out at the back, and it just helps you not from looking like a bird flapping around. So really do try that. I'm telling you, you'll probably feel, oh, this is so awkward, I can't do it like that. But if you were my student, I'd be rapping you on the knuckles, because you always have to keep that heel of your hand underneath the camera body and twist the lens with your thumb and your forefinger. All right, moving quickly on. Yeah, my bonus tip there, we've already talked about that now. So before you take any photos, the one thing that I want you to do, or one of the things that I want you to do, is to set the quality correctly on your camera. If you have had a new camera just out of the box, the chances are that you may have not even changed the quality already, and you might find that the setting isn't as optimum as it should be. Now, when you buy a digital camera, you decide on whether you're getting a 4 megapixel, probably not likely anymore, a 12 megapixel, a 16 or an 18 megapixel camera. And that's the maximum number of pixels that your camera can record. But you can, of course, record lower than that, and your quality could be set to lower than that. So check and make sure that it is set to the highest number of pixels that you can do. And you might also want to consider checking that the compression is set to the lowest level possible. Now, digital SLRs generally set the quality in those two different ways. So those two parts make up quality. So you've got the number of pixels, which is usually denoted by small, medium, or large, and then you also have the amount of compression, which is high, medium, or low, or you might see it in a Canon as like a little quarter moon kind of an icon, or maybe a jagged kind of a stairs for very high compression. The thing is that people try and keep the quality a little bit lower because they get more photos on their memory card. But seriously now, like the size of memory cards is so big, why would you want to sacrifice your quality when you pay so much for a camera? I know the file sizes become very large, but memory is very cheap. And it is so much easier to come down in quality after the photo has been taken than to try and make a bad photograph into a good quality picture. It's impossible. Most email programs or web uploading programs will have the facility for you to download your pictures, or sorry, when you're downloading your pictures, to make the quality better, or sorry, make the quality reduced, so you shouldn't have that issue. I'm just checking in here. People can see my screen, okay? And it's in color. You have audio, no screen, Donna? Oh, you can see it, okay. Sorry, for some reason it disappeared on one end here. So just bear with me 1 second. Talk amongst yourself. This is disappointing. Okay, well, we'll just have to trust that that it's working on the other end. I don't know why it's not working on this end. I think because I did it in the opposite way around. Let's get moving on. I'm sorry, I do apologize about that, folks. Okay, so the quality. Keep your quality high. Now, if you have any doubt about how to do that, you want to consult your manual to see how you change your quality setting. Even since I've had these screenshots taken, the picture or the types of cameras have changed quite a bit. So you want to, with the Nikon, you want to see up here, and to maneuver your way around the Nikon menu, you press the I button right there, and then navigate to the quality setting here. And then on the Canon, it's slightly different. Just see as well. Oh, that's recording. Okay. Sorry. Flicking back and forth there. The Canon, it's different as well. It's there. That's the icon. Now, I think somebody had a question about RAW. I just noticed there on the thing. I'll come back up here and look. Darlene, if I shoot in RAW. Yes, Darlene asks, if I shoot in RAW, is that not the best setting? Well, RAW is definitely a higher quality image than a JPEG image, Darlene, and it records all of the information, and it's definitely a much bigger file size. The problem with RAW is that you do have to go in and edit it in an image editing program such as Lightroom or Photoshop or Adobe Camera Raw to change those settings from the RAW settings. You have to convert it into a JPEG image. So there's an extra step involved in the process. And if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. I mean, I would shoot in RAW if I'm doing a professional shoot for friends or whatever. But generally, I actually just shoot in JPEG because it's quicker in terms of upload and edit. There's not as much work to be done. And I can shoot directly from JPEG and upload it to Facebook or to share it with my friends. Because you can't do that with RAW. So if I'm doing a more contrived shoot, I will definitely shoot in RAW because I've got lots more options with it. But if it's JPEG, JPEG just makes it a little easier to share. Diane says that and she's fixed it. She said she looked through the viewfinder and it's blurred. And you know, that's a good point that Diane brings up. You'll notice that if your viewfinder isn't sharp when you look through it, there's a little dial to the right of your viewfinder called a diopter, and that goes plus or minus to make it a little bit sharper or a little bit blurrier. It's to actually correct it for your eyesight. So it's like as if you've got those little plus or minus glasses on. So you want to check that. I have another question here from Leslie, and she's asking, or he's asking, I'm not sure which, what is the difference in between JPEG normal and JPEG fine? Okay, so JPEG fine is a lower compression rate than JPEG normal. That means that the quality of the JPEG fine is better than the quality of the JPEG normal. So in that situation, I would change it to JPEG fine. Okay. Now, something else you can do before you even start to take any photos is to format your memory card. Now, if you have been shooting a lot with your digital DSLR, with the card that you're using, you may have never formatted your card before. And a format is just like a scrub clean of what's on your memory card, and it erases all of the information, all of the residual information that is on there. I find that my card works much faster and records the information and uploads the information to my computer much, much faster if I use formatting regularly. Now, I won't ask you to format your card right now because if you have photos on there, they will be completely deleted. But formatting your card is always a good thing to do. And in fact, I just built it into my workflow that every time I take and upload my pictures, I have them backed up, I will go back in and format my card. And so I know that every time it's deleting all of the images and no information is getting left behind. Now, if you want to look for that, that's usually in the settings menu. It's not an easy button to get at because they don't want you to accidentally format your card and delete everything off of it. Because, you know, if you delete all of your images by accident, you actually can get them back. But if you format your card, there's no getting those images back. So just take a look at that on your own time in your camera menu or in your settings menu, and you see how to format that card. Now, let's move along. I'm moving pretty fast here. I hope you all can keep on because I know we have a lot to cover, and an hour goes so fast. So the three most powerful modes, and they are automatic modes, which will help you take better photos. Now, most of my students, when we're learning about digital SLRs and we're learning photography from the get-go, we tend to stay away from the full automatic modes. And I'll encourage you to stay away from the full green auto mode, which is where the camera takes over everything for you. And we'll talk a little bit about what mode I suggest in a little minute. But if you are doing a specific scene, the camera has gone to some extent, your camera manufacturers have come to some extent to create the settings best suited for certain types of photography. If you have a look at your mode dial, now each camera has a mode dial, most of them do, the top right or the top left hand side of your camera. Now this particular one that I have on here is from a Canon, I think it was a Rebel once upon a time. But they're generally the same that you have on the Nikon and the Canon. Even Sony and Olympus have a very similar mode dial. Panasonic might be slightly different. And some of them you might have to look on the back of the camera in a function setting. But you'll see the same iconology used all the time. So down here, this is the automatic zone. Anything in that yellow box, you've got full green auto, you have portrait mode, you have landscape mode, you have macro mode, you have a little person running there for fast action shots, night scene mode, and you have a flash off mode. So those are still automatic settings. They're all variations on the green auto. Up here is the creative zone. Now this is what you would use if you're starting to get a lot more into your photography. And these settings, you're taking over the control out of the camera's hand. So you're telling the camera, I know more about this than you do. So you've got program auto here. That is very similar to the green auto, but it allows you to make some decisions that you couldn't ordinarily do in green auto. TV or S, if you're on a Nikon or a Sony camera, is shutter priority mode. And that's where you control the shutter speed of your shots and the camera controls the aperture. So it's kind of a semi-automatic or a semi-manual mode. Then you have AV up here, which is aperture priority mode. And that's the flip-flop of TV, which is you control the aperture and the camera controls the shutter speed. And then you have M for full manual, where you control both of those exposure settings. Now the air depth is another one. It's really an automatic mode. It should be down here on the other side of this, in the automatic zone. And it's where you set the depth of field by visually looking through your viewfinder. In fact, a lot of cameras have done away with that right now. So the real main ones here are these ones down here in the automatic zone and up here in the creative zone. And like I said, most of my students that I teach in person and in online, we look at, oh, excuse me, night night. That's never happened before. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, that's my 2-year-old who had to give me a kiss. Live has never worked with children and animals. I didn't even know she could open the door. Okay, sorry about that. So creative zone, manual aperture priority, shutter priority is what we'll be using if you were doing more in-depth photography. But tonight it's enough for you to get to grips with this little zone down here, and everybody's will be slightly different. So you may have a kids and pets one, and actually if you have a scene mode in here, which some of the Nikon cameras do, you can go in and select like beach mode, you can select candlelight mode, museum mode. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of stuff in there. So play around with that, and you'll be surprised. I was teaching a class yesterday morning to a group of my MOPS friends, and some of them had their cameras for years, and they they were like, oh my gosh, I can take photos like of food, of candlelight, and everything is set specifically for particular lighting, particular focus, particular time of day. Everything is done a little bit differently. So let's have a look at some of them in detail, and the three most important ones that you will use the most often. So the first one here is portrait mode. Now portrait mode is generally a little person's head or lady's head, and portrait meaning photos of people. What happens in portrait mode is the camera automatically selects a wide open aperture, and the aperture is the hole in the front of the lens that lets in the light, and what that does actually is controls how much of your image is actually in focus, how much of your subject is actually in focus. Or conversely to that, it blurs the background. Now it can also blur the foreground too. So the technical side of things is controlling the aperture, which is going to give you a nice soft out of focus background and a nice pin sharp portrait on your subject. It also does like a digital filter over your image, which actually softens the skin tone. Now, to what extent it does that will depend on your camera, but this is something that, it does help with if you're doing portrait photography. It just gives a bit more of a natural look, and a lot of people don't realize that, but your camera is capable of doing all that in-camera filtering right there. Now, personally, I prefer to do a lot of that sort of stuff on Lightroom, and I like to have things come out of the camera the way they're supposed, just the way that I see them. But this is a really nice thing to play with, and I would absolutely encourage you to do that. Portrait is generally something if you were just one person in the shot, but it applies for like 2 or 3 people in the photograph. So portrait mode. Now you still have to use your zoom and everything else exactly the same, but it will just set these technical things in a particular way for you. So this is a shot, a portrait shot, an example of a portrait shot where the background is blurred out. That's Molly, who just came in to give me a good night kiss. But you can see how tight it is in terms of portrait is generally considered head and shoulders, so the background is slightly blurred out. Now that is also taken with no flash, so it's in a bright enough room. So that helps to give that blur as well. If you use portrait mode and the flash comes on, you'll notice that that blur won't be as evident. So it's a really good one to use in a brightly lit place, or if you have enough natural light outside or inside rather than flash. And I think it depends on your camera. Because it's automatic, your flash might automatically pop up. So just play around with that. Let's see. We have a question here from Katie, and she says, "What sure would you need to get that kind of blur?" That particular one was shot with a 50mm lens, Katie, and you'll see me refer to my nifty 50 all the time. That aperture is an f1.8. So in portrait mode, that very wide open aperture is going to be automatically selected, and I think it was probably shot at about that f1.8 because you can see her ears are even out of focus in that shot. So yeah, I probably didn't even shoot that on portrait mode specifically, but it is an example of what you can achieve with portrait mode. Is the same thing. All right, so anybody got anybody else? Any questions? Nicola is asking, can you stop the flash from working? I think Nicola asked, sorry, for those of you that can't see, if you can you stop the flash from working in portrait mode? it depends on your camera model. I have a feeling that you have to go out. It has to be in natural light, or otherwise the flash will come on. You cannot control your flash. So that's where you would have to move up into aperture priority mode and stop playing with that. So it's really a beginner's one. If you find that your flash was coming on, you know, I would have to suggest that you'd get into a better lighting situation, because just that flash look is not a very good one. But you know, that's one of the things with portrait mode that will start to frustrate you after a while. Okay, moving along, where the next one here is landscape mode. Now, landscape mode is kind of, again, the converse of portrait mode, whereas in portrait mode we wanted a wide open aperture so we could blur the foreground or the background. In landscape mode, the camera selects a very narrow aperture so that everything is in focus from here to infinity, from where you're at to as far away as you can see with the camera. You would want to do that in a landscape type shot. That's why landscape is the mode that is there. So that your eye is drawn right through the picture and that focus is all throughout the photograph. Landscape mode also puts a digital filter on there as well, where the greens and blues are intensified. And all of these filters can be controlled within your camera settings. If you have a poke around in your manual, you'll see how to do that. I think, in fact, I know for the Canon one, it is picture styles, and it's actually usually a shortcut button on the back of your camera. So you can see picture styles, and you might go to landscape and you see there's a little slider there for greens and blues, for brightness and darkness, and you can play if you wanted your greens to become more green, or your blue. If you're going to Ireland and you really want to punch up those green photos of the green grass, you can really intensify those within the camera. So, you know, I find most people, if you're getting to that stage, you're probably going to be more satisfied and controlling your photos outside of the camera, but that is definitely an option there for you as well. So here's an example of some green Irish grass. This is taken at home. So you can see how this one was taken in landscape mode. You can see how the grass is intensified and the blues are bluer. Now, the sky actually wasn't as grey as that, but it was picked up a bit like that just because of that intensified look in the picture. Let's see. We have a question here. I'm just going to quickly run back here to the chat box. Why can I not see the bottom of your question? Darlene asked, to shoot interior shots, what mode is best to use? And then I can't see the rest of it. Can you press the, let's see what happens if I press the return key, or I just have to arrow up. It won't let me see what the bottom part of your question is. Oh, she's off. Okay. I can't quite see your question. If you could just ask it again. Darlene, to shoot interior shots, what's the best mode to use? It really just depends on what type of a look you're looking for. You know, it will depend whether you want to shoot flash, or whether you've got light, or whether you're trying to do, if you're trying to do like, you know, real estate type shots. So if you want to write that in there, I shoot a rehab facility. Again, I can't see the bottom of your question for some reason, Darlene. If you want to, you can go ahead and just email me your question, and I can give you a little bit more specific advice on that, because I cannot see it. Try to minimize. She's asking me to do that. Kitty, not working. There you go. Thank you, Casey Decker. You helped me. Okay, so let's see what Darlene's asking us. It keeps disappearing for some reason off the screen. So Darlene, you can just go ahead, like I say, and email me your question directly, and I will help you out. And that way we can get some specifics on your camera type and lens and that sort of stuff, and I can give you some advice, okay? Great. All right, so lastly, we're going to look at the sports mode. Now, in the sports mode, the camera selects a very fast shutter speed, and it will also continuously shoot when you have your finger on the shutter button. So some of you may have a continuous shoot button as well. It's like a little stack of papers, a little icon with like 3 different squares stacked on top of each other. And what that allows you to do is continuously press your shutter button or continuously take a shot as you have your finger held down on the shutter button. The camera, the shutter speed is different to that shutter button release. The shutter speed is actually going to freeze the action. That's the actual how quickly the camera's shutter mechanism opens and closes. And when it's set to a fast speed, it's going to freeze any action. So if somebody's jumping to shoot a basket or running around on a soccer field, that action is going to be frozen in sort of action right in the air. It will also change your focus mode to the servo focus mode, which means that instead of being able to focus on something and recompose, which we're going to talk about in a wee minute, the camera will continually focus on a subject that's moving towards you. This can be very useful for kids. So if you've got a wiggly 2-year-old who doesn't like to sit still for very long, that servo focus mode can be very useful. And a quick way to access that is to turn it to sports mode. Now, sports mode, the flash will not fire. So this again becomes one of the situations, well, I'm shooting sports, I'm at a basketball match and I'm inside. I could do with using flash, but in sports mode your flash will not fire. So it's designed for sports that are outside or well-lit situations. And again, you will find that it will not work too good if you're inside at all, because it cannot cope with that low light because of the fast shutter speed. So experiment with it, but it's definitely a good one to use. You know, if you're out and about, you're fast-moving subjects, not necessarily even people, fast-moving animals, you know, cars or motocross or, you know, bikes or that sort of stuff. So that's kind of an interesting one to look at. I use sports mode sometimes just to capture action with my kiddos, like I say. So they don't have to be running around a sports field. This is my bedroom and it's brightly lit. This is my eldest daughter, Sophie, and so she was just jumping up and down in the bed. But I needed that force, that fast shutter speed to freeze the action, to freeze her hair, to freeze the tutu and all that kind of jazz. So there are other ways of using those icons on top of your, and those little automatic modes on top of your mode dial rather than just using them for the specific thing that you might think it's used for. So, you know, be creative with them and have a look around them and see what is actually happening on your camera screen when you move into that setting. And how you'll know is that the options on your screen will be grayed out, so you won't have a full range of options as you go through them. You'll only be able to change certain things. And it is definitely good for somebody that's just using their camera in automatic to you know, play around with some of these settings. Now, let's move on. Oops. So what I want you to do right now, if you have your camera with you or beside you, I want you to take it into your hands and we're going to take a photograph. Now, if you have anything on your desk and or if you're like in the living room and there's a little bit of light, you know, try and shoot something that's a little bit lit up. How we're going to do it is we're just going to break down what happens when you're actually taking a photograph, so that you can see how the camera works and get an idea for some of these settings. So when you press your finger on the shutter button, which is what you press to take the photograph, a couple of things are happening. The camera is deciding on what the focus should be, and it's also deciding what the exposure should be. Now, what exposure means is how bright or how dark the photograph should be, and it decides that through measuring the light, and then it makes a calculation on the shutter and decides what the shutter speed should be and the aperture should be. So those two things together is what gives you the exposure. And when you're in automatic, you don't have any control over that. You don't have any control over what the shutter speed or what the aperture is going to be. The camera makes up those decisions for you. But the focus is the one part that you do have control over, and focus is super, super important. Most students that I teach, and I teach a lot of students, and they're just a lot of them are pretty much out of the gate with a digital SLR, and some of them have been using it for years. They still don't realize that this is a two-step button when you take a photograph. When you press your finger on the shutter button, there's several things that are happening. The digital SLRs generally have the option to use autofocus or manual focus. And autofocus is an awesome system. And, you know, believe me, I started out photography with manual focus lenses that were extremely difficult to focus, rangefinder cameras that were extremely difficult to focus. And when autofocus came along, it just made my life so much easier, especially for somebody that wears glasses and eyesight leaves a lot to be desired. So just make sure firstly that your camera lens is switched to autofocus, and that will be at the AF on the front of your lens. If you switch it to manual focus, you'll see that when you press your finger on the shutter button halfway down, nothing happens or nothing moves on your lens. Now, there is a place for manual focus, and some people do like to focus manually. Sometimes you might use manual focus if it's very dark, or if you're at the aquarium or something like that where autofocus has a hard time working. But generally, most people like to use autofocus. But the trick is to getting it to work right. If you can control your focus correctly, you can get tack sharp photos, but you can only do that once you know how to use the autofocus. People worry a lot about wanting to take intentionally blurry photos, like having that intentionally blurry background behind Molly in that photograph of her out of the bath. But you can't do that until you learn how to focus. So that's what we're going to look at right now. There is the autofocus manual switch. So just make sure that that's always switched to auto. You know, I really don't suggest people change off of autofocus for most things. And I'm talking about autofocus, not necessarily, we're not talking about the manual settings, the exposure settings. We're talking about focus here. But sometimes it can get knocked off by if somebody else is using your camera, or for kiddos, or just, you know, it gets moved. So that's the first thing to look at if you think your camera's not working properly. The button underneath that, you'll see sometimes a second button, and that's usually imaging. And just as an aside, you should be using image stabilization if you're hand holding your camera. If you're using a tripod, then you can switch your image stabilization to off. But for everything else, image stabilization should be on, or sometimes it's called vibration reduction. Somebody has a question. Kelly is asking what setting to use. This is for auto. I think, are you referring to auto focus or manual focus? Or maybe you're talking about the top, the mode dial. This is going to be applicable to whichever mode you're in here at the top, whether you're in the creative zone or whether you're in the automatic zone. We haven't talked about changing that just yet. So what I want you to do, whoops, I'm skipping ahead. What I want you to do is just for general purpose photography, instead of just using the green auto, what I want you to do is switch it to the P, or the program auto mode. Now, if you have never used program auto mode before, you will find that a whole bunch of information comes up in the screen that you might not have noticed before. Don't worry about it, because right now everything within that menu can be now changed, but it's usually set to just automatic. So program auto is still an automatic setting, but it will allow you to make some changes within that setting. So for example, in program auto mode, the flash does not come on automatically. So if I want to take a photo without flash, I just don't put my flash on. And if I do want to take a photo with flash, I have to pop it up at the side. If you turn your camera to the right-hand side, or sorry, if you're looking at it, I suppose it's the left-hand side in your hand, there's a little flash button there at the side, and that's what pops up your flash if you're in program auto mode. But program auto mode allows you, it still sets the exposure settings, but it does allow you to take control of certain things. And one of the things that I like to take control of is the focus point. So when you look through your viewfinder and just in automatic, you'll see that usually, now this is where it gets tricky because everybody's camera is different, but there's usually little either red boxes or green boxes or little red dots or green dots or black dots inside your viewfinder. And depending on the camera model, you'll have maybe 1, 3, 64, 96, depending on your camera model of those little boxes. And what those is it's telling you where the focus points are going to be in your camera or in your picture. They're telling you what it wants to focus at. And when you're in automatic and you're not controlling your focus point, the camera picks up on the closest thing to you in the frame or the thing that is the biggest object in the frame. And it doesn't necessarily pick up on what you want to take a picture of. And that happens when we have photographs of, like, you know, 2 people together and the camera thinks you're trying to take a photograph right behind them and the wall is in focus and they're blurry. Or if you're trying to be creative and maybe, you know, taking a photo of somebody holding a flower, you want the flower out of focus and the person in focus, but the camera thinks, oh, she's trying to take a photo of the flower, and that's what it picks up on. I'm sure you've all had that experience, right? So if you have had that and you're finding difficulty with your focus, I want you to change your focus point to the center focus. And this way you know that the point that is in the center of your image is what is in focus, okay? So how do we do that? So this is an example of the 40D or the 50D focus points. So you can see that there are 12 different focus points there. And you can change those on the camera. Now I'm going to show you the Canon, let me see. The Canon one is right there. Can you see this little kind of X? And there's a button. If you press that button, you will see the that little crisscross. You can change where that focus point is, up, down, left, right, or select the middle point. If you're using a Nikon camera, what you're going to want to do is navigate to this. Just easier to show you. Let me see. It's auto focus point selection. So this is the little icon for it here on the back of the camera, if you can see that. And it's usually up here somewhere. I don't see it right there. Oh, I do, sorry. It's this little icon here. See, I've already switched here to the single point. It could be a solid rectangle there either if it's on auto. So auto the camera decides where it is, but I want you to change it so that you are just picking the center point. Now, I'm sure there's a few questions on that, so let me see. Gail's asking a question that she has a D5200. Is there a way to silence the shutter? I think there probably is, Gail. I cannot answer that. I don't use Nikon myself, but it is generally an electronic shutter sound, so there probably is a way of turning that off. You'll have to check your camera manual. You certainly can do everything with the 5200, so I would be surprised if you couldn't. Yes, Esther, this generally does. Esther's asking, does this work with a bridge camera? It depends on the camera that you have, but I also teach a bridge camera course, and we have found that in general, most bridge cameras have this option too, but it may only be an option of 3 points as opposed to like 12 different points. And Diane has the Fuji 5100. You'd have to check your manual, Diane, to see. It should have. It's hard for me to tell everyone. Unfortunately, I don't have access to. I really wish I could jump through your screen and we could find it in 2 seconds. But if you check your manual, what you're looking for is autofocus point selection, and that will help you out. In some cameras it looks like little brackets, in some cameras it's like boxes, and some cameras it's little dots, so it's quite possible it's the little brackets, Bonnie, in your camera. So what happens now is that when you're taking a photograph, instead of the camera focus being on the subject that's closest to you, you want your focus is going to be in the center of the image. So you have something like this. Now, what happens is not always you want whatever in the center to be the sharpest thing of the image. Like sometimes you want to be a little bit creative and have it off to the side. That's why you're given the option that you can toggle through your focus point. So you could actually place the focus point off to the left or off to the right, or you can use what's called the focus lock method. Now, this is something that's been around in photography for years and years, and even with compact cameras in the 90s, when I was teaching photography back then, we were teaching the same method. And what it is that when you are in your ordinary auto mode or your program auto mode, you focus your camera by pressing your finger down on the shutter button halfway, and when you look at your subject. So you decide on what you're taking a photograph of. You press your finger on the shutter button halfway, and once it's halfway down, that focus is locked at that distance. So you now can shift your camera to the left or to the right, up or down, to take a picture, and the focus will be locked on wherever you have it. So for example, in the one here of the dandelion, we have our focus. This isn't right at the center, and imagine if it was even further off. So we have it in the center, lock our focus, and then shift your camera off to the side. So now the focus is here in the middle. The focus point is the middle, but the focus is still off here to the side. And so this can become very powerful and very useful when you're taking photos and you're trying to be a little bit more creative than just the ordinary point and shoot, and letting the camera decide what you want to take photos of. So let me just go back. We have a few questions there. Bonnie is good. Diane asks me, is it the plus or minus button? I think it's a plus minus, so it could be. Yeah, it's not the plus minus button. It is autofocus area mode. Leslie's got it there, AF area mode. Diane, what did you say your camera was again, Diane? If you could just let me know, I'll help you out. Darlene asks that if you are shooting more than one person, is it best to use the center focus? It is, and what you do, Darlene, is you focus lock and recompose. The thing is that even if there's two people in the frame, both of them have to be on the same focal plane to be in focus. You know, focus works on distance, and no matter if somebody is standing behind the other person, somebody is going to be a little bit more off, out of focus than the other. Now, that all depends on aperture and all that sort of stuff, and we're not going to get into that right now. But generally, if you can have your two people as close as possible, if they're right standing beside each other, if one's in focus, the other one is going to be in focus too. So just use your focus lock on one and then recompose to include the other. Diane says she's using the Fuji. I'm not sure, Diane, where that is. I don't think it's the plus minus button. That's something different. You want to look for focus point selection or autofocus point selection. You probably will have to look in your little book and see. So has anybody got any questions on that? That's something that I would encourage you to practice with, that off-center focusing lock method. So you lock your focus and recompose. Now, you can recompose off to the left or right, up or down. Do not move the distance between your camera and the subject. That will not work. You have then changed the focal distance and your subject will appear out of focus. Don't angle or tilt your camera either, because you're also changing that focal distance. So always keep that to remain constant. Practice and let me know how you get on. All right, so be careful of focus point. It is really, really crucial. And I will say one thing as well. If you're using a Nikon DSLR, you'll find that the focus point is usually controlled by the control pad at the back of the camera. And some of the older models, and actually some of the newer models too, just not the higher end ones, you can accidentally move that jog dial up, down, left, and right and shift your focus point without knowing. Unfortunately, the feature only comes out in the later models or in the higher end models to lock that jog pad so you don't knock it off. So just always be aware that you want your focus point to be in the center, or at automatic if you want to go back there, but I'm encouraging people all the time to get out of auto and slowly but surely getting you out of everything automatic on your camera. Has anybody got any questions about any of that? Lisa's asked me what kind of camera do I have. I personally use Canon. I shoot at the minute with a 7D, and I've always shot Canon just because we were Canon agents. And Nikon isn't very popular in Ireland, or it wasn't back then. It's got more popular over the years. But Canon is what I've always been shooting because I always had access to Canon stuff and Canon lenses and flashes. So you tend to pick whatever you stick with. That's the one. You don't chop and change through brands. Any other questions? But they're both very good. I mean, I couldn't say I would prefer. I mean, I prefer Canon, but it's mostly a familiarity thing. I teach as many Nikon users as Canon users these days, and Sony and Fuji are very popular as well. All right. So basically everything we covered tonight is a very, very basic intro to using your digital SLR, and we covered a lot of very basic things. I would suggest, if you have an interest at all in learning about your camera, to move away from that green auto setting and start experimenting with some of the automatic settings, or at least the program auto mode. The program auto mode is really a jump into the manual settings. And to just use a digital SLR on just the green auto setting is, it's a big bulky camera and something that's very powerful for doing something that's so limited. Because truthfully, you're not getting the full creative control with that. And if you showed up here to the camera class tonight, I know you're somebody that's really interested in learning more about your camera. And so I want to invite you to consider taking part in my Demystify Your DSLR course that is beginning next week. This class is something that I run periodically live with a certain small group of students, and we do it online just like this one. So it's delivered via a webinar, hopefully with a lot fewer technical difficulties than what we have had tonight, and little 2-year-old difficulties as well. But it's a live weekly class. It's a small group of people, so you get a lot more individual teaching as well, and tutoring. And just to give you an idea of what we're going to be covering, we are pretty much going through all of the different settings and all of the buttons. Before we even start the class, I know what camera you have, and we get familiar with that, and so I can help you out as best I can with how to find which button where. We spend a lot more time on looking at lenses, and we'll go into some of the other focus modes. Tonight we talked about stationary objects and how to focus pretty much, and focus, lock, and recompose for stationary objects, but we'll talk about moving objects and all that sort of stuff. If you want to be a little bit more confident with you're doing your workflow and reviewing, deleting, protecting, all that stuff, we cover all of that too. In our second week, we're going to talk all about light, and you learn all about flash, when to use it, when not to use it. We'll talk about brightening up your images and taking better photos in low light, which is one of the things that digital cameras are really good at. But if you're not using it in the right way, it's not going to give you the results. And in automatic, it will never do it for you. So I will be able to advise you on different lenses that you will be able to take and different settings that you will be able to use to really get the best photos from what digital camera that you have, what digital SLR you have. We'll also go into white balance and metering and start using some of those more advanced functions in more detail as well. In Module 3, we're talking a little bit more about taking more creative pictures, and we're talking about all of the different creative modes and how to do specific types of photography more creatively. We won't be spending so much time on the functions of the camera, but we'll be talking about how to set up better portraits, how to set up better landscapes, and just a little bit more about composition. So we'll not be as heavily focused on the camera, but you will actually be going out and taking more photographs and improving your photography that way. And finally, we'll be talking more about the back end of doing with something with your photos. Most people and most photography classes don't really touch on this, and they don't touch on organizing your images and backing them up and prepping for print and editing and stuff like that. And so what I want to do is to just empower you to go out and make informed deciding on editing programs, and you know, you want to get them printed and all that sort of stuff, and also for sharing with people and printing and all that good stuff. So we talk about that in Module 4, and then that's our last module, so if there's other questions and stuff like that, we deal with that too. You can sign up right now online. The course is live, and you can go to demystifyyourdslr.com and you can register there. Like I said, a class is limited because I do give a lot of feedback each week. Every student will get an assignment, and that assignment, if it's given in to me in time, will be critiqued via video, and I will record a little video going through what you've done and how you could improve. So it's a really good way to get feedback on your work. It's quite an interactive class, and I'm available for questions through the week. And the class is recorded because not everybody can make this live session on a Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. And what I've found from other students is that most people want to review and absorb the information after the class, because we do go through an awful lot of information. Demystifyyourdslr.com, you can sign up tonight. The class costs $97 for the 4 weeks, and I think that is really incredibly good value for what you get. Usually each course, each lesson would be $100 by itself. So it is good value, and you've seen and heard a little bit about what I can teach and how I deliver, and most people find it very good. So if you have any questions, this is now a good time to ask. I will be doing more webinars like this. I'm going to try and do them every month or so. Sometimes it's tricky to get it every single month, but every couple of months. So if you have enjoyed it, please tell everybody about it. Get in touch on Facebook. If you're not a Facebook member of the Take 52 group, I encourage you to sign up there. You'll find that through the CameraShy Facebook group. And if you have any questions about anything we covered or anything you'd like me to help you with, or to do with the class, or to get some classes in person, I would love and encourage you to get in touch with me. You can shoot me an email, and I can help you that way. Katie is asking, how often do we do the modules? Each module is once a week. So the class will start, the class time starts at January 21st, which is next week. Let me see. Oh, I don't have it listed here. But it pretty much goes for 4 weeks. So we're covered by the middle of February. We're finished. So that is all for tonight, folks. It's just after 9 o'clock, and again, I really appreciate you coming in. I hope you learned how to do something, at least to hold your camera often, right? And Eric, thank you so much. I appreciate you all taking time out to hang out with me. Awesome. Oh, it's great to see some local people too. Thank you. All right. Awesome stuff. Take care. Good night.